Love, once a tender flame, had become a raging inferno in the house of Raymond and Isabel. Their laughter that once echoed through tiled halls now dissolved into sharp words and clashing silences. Pride had taken root in both hearts, one hardened by ego, the other by defiance, until their marriage became less of a union and more of a battlefield where neither wished to bow. Raymond stormed into the living room that evening, his tie loose, his face set like a stone carved by arrogance. He had come home late again, the scent of expensive wine and perfume still clinging to his shirt, and Isabel, seated on the sofa with arms folded, did not wait to ask where he had been. She already knew. The whispers from her friends, the stares of neighbors, the careless phone calls answered in hushed tones. Everything pointed to betrayal. Yet she wasn't the type of woman to cry in silence or retreat into a corner. Fierce and unyielding, Isabel shot her words like daggers. You carry another woman's scent like a medal of honor, Raymond. Do you think I'm blind? Do you think I'm weak? Her voice was not trembling, but steady, firm, filled with a storm he could not control. Raymond's pride clashed with hers instantly. And what if I do? You think you can question me, as though you built me? I made this life, Isabel. I brought you here, and if I wish, I can throw you out. The words fell like heavy stones, but Isabel did not flinch. Instead, she rose, her wrapper sweeping across the tiled floor, her face a mirror of fire. Throw me out, she laughed bitterly. Raymond, I'm not a woman you throw away like old clothes. Mark my words, one day you will choke on the pride that feeds you now. And with that, she walked away, leaving him standing there, both angry and shaken. For deep inside, he knew her words carried the weight of prophecy. Where a wife's stubborn fire burned too bright, another woman's gentle lies promised comfort. Men often flee not because of lack of love, but because of the fear of being tamed. So Raymond ran, not to silence, but to the dangerous music of flattery. Selene entered his life like a perfumed breeze, soft where Isabel was sharp, yielding where Isabel was defiant. She was a socialite, draped always in silk, her laughter tinkling like glass, her praise never-ending. In Selene's eyes, Raymond was not flawed, not reckless. He was a king, a man destined to rule, a man too powerful to be questioned. She knew how to stroke his ego, how to lean close and whisper, "You deserve better than a wife who competes with you. You need a queen who will kneel when you rise." These words were poison dressed as nectar, and Raymond drank deeply, his pride swelling as though he had found what Isabel denied him. Their meetings were luxurious, held in rooftop lounges and private parties where Selene paraded him like a prized possession. Raymond, once humiliated at home, now basked in the glow of her praise, convincing himself that life would be better with a woman who knew her place. Yet beneath her charm lay calculation. Selene saw not Raymond the man, but Raymond the opportunity, a husband tied to wealth and influence. Still, Raymond didn't care. To him, Selene was everything Isabel was not, easy, flattering, obedient. And so, the noose tightened slowly around his neck, though he mistook it for an embrace. As though one mistress were not enough to satisfy pride's hunger, Raymond soon found another flame, one reckless, wild, and young. Pride, when unchecked, never settles for one cup, it thirsts for rivers. Becky was different from Selene. Where Selene was refined and manipulative, Becky was fiery and impulsive, a much younger woman with a kind of daring that thrilled Raymond. She laughed loudly, challenged him playfully but never seriously, and clung to him with a dependence that made him feel irreplaceable. Her youth reignited in him a sense of conquest. With Becky, he was not just a husband, but a man desired, pursued, and envied. He convinced himself that Becky loved him for who he was, not for his wealth, though every gift he bought her, every trip he funded, every jewelry box filled with gold told a different truth. With two women pulling at his heart and ego, Raymond's vision blurred. He began to see Isabel as the problem, the obstacle to his happiness. Why endure her sharp tongue when Selene's flattery and Becky's wild laughter offered him peace? At home, Isabel's stubbornness grated on him, her words reminding him of his failings, her defiance bruising his pride. In contrast, His mistresses allowed him to play king, to live in illusions. In his mind, the choice was clear: to be free of Isabel's fire and bask in the false sunshine of Selene and Becky. What he didn't realize was that while he was busy feeding his ego, Isabel was waiting like a storm gathering in silence, preparing for the day thunder would strike. Some women cry when betrayed. Others beg. But the fierce ones, the stubborn ones, they rise like storms, silent at first, then thundering so loudly the world takes notice. Isabel was not the type to bend or break. She met Raymond's betrayal with confrontation, her eyes blazing each time he returned late, each time whispers reached her ears. One evening, after hearing of him dining publicly with Selene, Isabel stood waiting at the gate, her arms crossed, her voice carrying through the compound. "You disgrace me in front of the world, Raymond. You parade another woman while I still bear your name." Neighbors peeked through windows, but Isabel didn't care. Shame wasn't hers to bear, it was his. Raymond boiled with anger, but Isabel's stubbornness only grew sharper. "You think you'll crush me? Try harder. I'm not your slave, I'm not your shadow. If you want freedom, don't sneak around. Divorce me in the open." Her defiance shocked him. Where most women might have begged for peace, Isabel demanded war. Her sharp words spread quickly, becoming gossip that reached even Raymond's colleagues. Instead of appearing as a powerful man in control, Raymond looked like a husband cornered by his own wife. This humiliation gnawed at him, and for the first time, the thought of divorce was not only tempting but necessary to save his pride. Yet deep in his chest, her words unsettled him. He had always known Isabel was fierce, but now she was unbending, daring him to act. It became a battle of wills, his pride versus her stubborn fire, and neither was willing to bow. There comes a time when pride convinces a man that leaving will bring peace, forgetting that peace cannot bloom in poisoned soil. Raymond mistook freedom for happiness and betrayal for power. Raymond sat in his office late at night, the city lights twinkling below, divorce papers spread before him. His pen hovered over the lines, and in his mind he pictured a life with Selene and Becky, one filled with submission and adoration, free from Isabel's sharp tongue. Yet as he imagined it, Isabel's voice echoed in his ears. "Serve the papers if you're man enough. But you'll regret it." The memory unsettled him, but pride pushed his hand forward. He convinced himself that Isabel was nothing without him, that once she was discarded, she would crumble, and he would rise even greater. At home, Isabel watched his every move with knowing eyes. She was no fool. She saw the signs, the late nights, the whispered calls, the sudden avoidance. But instead of pleading, she became even more unyielding. One night, she stood before him, arms crossed, and taunted. "Do it, Raymond. Serve me the divorce. Free yourself if you dare. But remember, you may win the battle, but I will win the war." Her words cut through him like a sword, and for the first time, he felt a tremor of fear. For a man who believed he held all the cards, Isabel's stubborn confidence made him question whether he was walking into victory or destruction. Fate does not reveal its treasures in the open. It waits in shadows, behind sealed envelopes, within hushed meetings that seem ordinary to the blind but extraordinary to the wise. Isabel, fierce and unbending, was not waiting for Raymond's mercy. She was waiting for destiny's call. While Raymond wasted nights in the arms of Selene and Becky, Isabel sat in a lawyer's office, her stubborn face set with pride. Her late uncle, a man of immense wealth who had lived abroad for decades, had passed away, and whispers of an inheritance had reached her ears. At first, Raymond dismissed her trips as petty acts of defiance, believing she was seeking legal counsel for a divorce. He smirked whenever she left in her simple but confident attire, unaware that behind her steady steps was a storm gathering strength. Isabel had learned long ago never to reveal her hand too early, and so she let Raymond drown in arrogance while she laid foundations afire. The meetings were long, the papers detailed, and the sum staggering. Isabel sat through each one with the focus of a general preparing for war. Her lawyers marveled at her composure. She did not gasp or cry when told of the figures. She only nodded with her usual fierceness. "Put it in writing. I want no loopholes," she commanded, her stubbornness ensuring that every coin, every estate, every stock was secured. Unlike other women who might have run to their husbands with news, Isabel kept her silence. She wanted Raymond to feel the weight of his betrayal before learning that the woman he thought was powerless now sat on the throne of an empire greater than his. At night, when Raymond staggered home smelling of wine and women, Isabel watched him with an almost mocking calmness. "One day," she thought as she stared at him, "you will beg to undo the words you've spoken, but I will be too stubborn to let you." Her secret was her shield, and with every meeting she attended, with every signature she placed on a page, she grew taller, prouder, more unyielding. Fate was tilting the scales, and soon, the man who had drafted divorce papers would find himself bound in the chains of regret. There are nights when betrayal parades itself in public, when shame is no longer whispered, but shouted across a crowded hall. Such was the night Isabel tasted humiliation, not in secret, but under the blinding lights of a business dinner meant to crown her husband's pride. The hall was filled with Lagos' finest, politicians, investors, oil magnates, and women dripping in diamonds. Raymond walked in proudly, not with Isabel at his side, but with Becky, the young mistress glowing in her youthful arrogance. Isabel, who had been invited in her own right through her family connections, arrived separately, and when her eyes met her husband's across the room, the entire hall fell into an awkward silence. Raymond ignored her presence, parading Becky, as though she were the true queen of his house. Whispers filled the air. "Is that not his wife? How shameless! Look at him flaunting the girl." Isabel stood rooted, her heart heavy, but her pride unbroken. Throughout the dinner, Raymond spoke loudly, boasting of his business, his influence, his control over life itself. Becky clung to his arm, smiling smugly at Isabel as if victory were hers already. But Isabel, stubborn to her core, refused to shrink into shame. When the opportunity came to speak, she rose with dignity and delivered her words in a voice that silenced the hall. "A man may wear a crown of gold, but if his house is burning, he is no king. And a woman may be mocked, but if her spirit remains unbroken, she is no victim." Her words, sharp and defiant, struck Raymond like thunder. Laughter and applause followed her speech, but in his heart, he felt the sting of humiliation. As the night ended, Raymond tried to brush off her defiance, but something had shifted. Isabel no longer seemed like the ordinary wife he believed he could throw away. Even Becky, in her youthful arrogance, felt the heat of Isabel's presence. Raymond returned home angry, yet unsettled. Isabel, however, simply retired to her room, her mind already whispering, "Let him mock me now. Tomorrow I will mock him with power he never imagined." The universe has a strange way of balancing pride and pain. Just when betrayal thinks it has won, destiny lifts the downtrodden and crowns them with gold. For Isabel, the day came like thunder after a long storm. The lawyer's final call came on a Monday morning. Isabel sat across the polished mahogany desk as they slid the documents toward her. "Mrs. Isabel Okoye," the lead lawyer said, his tone steady yet reverent, "you are now the sole beneficiary of your late uncle's estate. Current valuation, $200 million in assets, shares, and cash." The room fell silent except for the scratch of Isabel's pen as she signed her acceptance. There were no tears, no gasps, only a cold, stubborn smile as she whispered, "Now let the game begin." Isabel walked out of that office, not as a wife mocked and scorned, but as a queen crowned by fate. She began planning her rise immediately, purchasing prime lands, acquiring silent shares in multinational firms, and moving into circles that once ignored her. She did not rush to announce her fortune to Raymond. Instead, she waited, letting the whispers grow. Soon, society buzzed with the news. "Did you hear? Isabel is now worth more than her husband." Invitations poured in, powerful men and women who once looked past her now bowed in her presence. When Raymond heard of it, he dismissed it at first as rumor. But when investors he had courted began speaking Isabel's name with reverence, when he saw her on magazine covers draped in power, Reality crashed upon him like a storm. The woman he thought powerless now towered above him in wealth and influence. And Isabel, proud and stubborn, was not humble in her victory. She made sure to attend events he attended, not to cry for his attention, but to remind him, "The fire you tried to quench has become a raging inferno. Burn with regret, Raymond." Power does not whisper, it roars. And when a woman once mocked ascends to a throne of her own making, the earth itself bends in acknowledgement. Isabel was no longer the wife. They called her the queen. Her first major event as an heiress was held at a five-star hotel in Victoria Island. The hall glittered with chandeliers, champagne glasses clinked, and the city's elite gathered not for Raymond, but for Isabel. She wore a crimson gown that blazed like fire, her head high, her words sharp, her presence unyielding. Even the governor's wife came to greet her, calling her Madame Isabel with respect. Raymond arrived too, uninvited but desperate, and when he saw the crowd bow to her, his heart sank with shame. The whispers returned. Isabel now commands more than him. She is the true power in this city. Raymond tried to pull her aside, but Isabel faced him with the fierceness of a lioness. "Do not touch me," she hissed. "Tonight is not your night. It never will be again." She then walked past him, her gown sweeping the floor like a royal train, leaving him stranded in the hall, mocked by the very people who once praised him. Selene and Becky, watching from a distance, began to feel insecure. They had fought for a man who was now shrinking into Isabel's shadow. That night marked a turning point. Isabel was no longer merely wealthy. She was untouchable. Her stubbornness, once mocked as arrogance, now looked like strength to those who sought her favor. She was no longer Raymond's wife. She was Isabel, the heiress, the queen, the woman who had turned betrayal into power. Raymond, for the first time, realized he might never recover the ground he had lost. Pride collapses not in silence, but in frantic attempts to mend what it once shattered. And so Raymond, drunk with regret, tried to undo his own betrayal. But some wounds, once opened, refused to close. Raymond rushed home, his heart pounding with desperation. He tore up the divorce papers, scattering them across the study floor like ashes of a dream gone wrong. He called for Isabel, but she appeared in the doorway, arms folded, eyes blazing with stubborn defiance. "What now, Raymond?" she asked coolly. "Have Selene and Becky lost their shine? Or did you finally realize what you threw away?" Raymond fell silent, shame washing over him. He tried to explain, to beg, to tell her he wanted to fix things. But Isabel laughed bitterly, her voice dripping with scorn. "Withdraw the divorce? No, Raymond. Proceed with it. Go on. Show the world you are man enough to finish what you started." Her taunts cut him deeper than any insult. He had expected her to cry, to soften, to beg for reconciliation. Instead, she mocked his weakness, turning his regret into a blade that pierced his pride. He walked away that night, sad, angry, and confused, his mind a battlefield of contradictions. He could not proceed with the divorce. He no longer wanted to lose her, but he could not face the humiliation of admitting defeat. Isabel's stubbornness left him stranded in a purgatory of regret. In the weeks that followed, Raymond tried everything. He sent gifts, flowers, letters, but Isabel ignored them. Desperate, he reached out to her family, pleading with them to intervene. "Talk to her," he begged. "She listens to you. I only want peace." But when they came to Isabel, she stood her ground. "Do not meddle," she told them coldly. "I am not a woman to be pushed like a pawn. If he wants me, he must crawl. And if he cannot, then let him stay with his mistresses." Her words echoed across the family home, leaving Raymond in deeper torment. When power shifts, so do loyalties. The same lips that once praised begin to whisper doubts, and the same hands that once clung begin to release. Selene had sung Raymond's praises, but power is a magnet, and she could see the pull of Isabel's throne from afar. Selene had built her entire identity around prestige and wealth, and at first, Raymond had been her perfect prize. He was powerful, wealthy, and willing to shower her with the luxuries she craved. But when Isabel's inheritance became public knowledge, Selene felt the ground beneath her shift. Invitations that once bore Raymond's name now bore Isabel's, and business leaders who once took Selene's calls suddenly stopped answering. Slowly, Selene began to withdraw, no longer eager to be seen publicly with Raymond. She could not risk being tied to a man whose power was visibly waning in comparison to his wife's meteoric rise. Her withdrawal was not immediate, but subtle. She canceled dates, avoided events where Isabel was present, and began speaking less of their future together. Raymond noticed the distance, and it gnawed at his pride. The mistress, who once made him feel invincible, was now slipping through his fingers like sand. When he confronted her, Selene smiled coolly and said, "Raymond, you're still a great man, but society is changing. A woman like Isabel commands more than money. She commands respect. I cannot fight her shadow." Those words broke him more than her absence. They were a confirmation that his wife had become the sun, and he was merely standing in her eclipse. Isabel, stubborn and fierce, watched Selene's withdrawal with a knowing smirk. She did not interfere, nor did she confront her husband about it. To Isabel, Selene's retreat was poetic justice, proof that Raymond's pride was crumbling without her lifting a finger. Selene's betrayal was a wound Raymond could not hide, and Isabel took satisfaction in knowing that the very woman he had flaunted against her was now abandoning him for her throne of fire. Youthful love often hides behind bright smiles and loud laughter, but when the fire dims, the hunger beneath it is revealed. Becky was never truly in love with Raymond. She was in love with his pockets, his status, and the illusions of power he carried. As Selene faded into the background, Becky grew louder in her demands. No longer content with trinkets and occasional trips, she began insisting on designer wardrobes, luxury vacations, and cash to start her own business. Raymond, already stretched thin by a struggling company and dwindling influence, found himself drained. Becky's youthful charm had once made him feel alive, but now it exposed him to a painful truth. She was a parasite, feeding on his pride until there was nothing left to take. Whenever he hesitated, Becky would pout, threaten to leave, and remind him that there were other men waiting to provide what he was failing to give. Raymond's patience wore thin, but his ego trapped him. How could he admit that the young mistress he had chosen over Isabel was nothing but a burden? To confess that truth would mean acknowledging Isabel's warnings and bowing to her stubborn victory. So he endured Becky's tantrums, even as she drained his finances and embarrassed him in public with her recklessness. His friends began whispering about her arrogance, and business associates laughed at how far he had fallen. Yet still, he clung to her, too ashamed to crawl back to Isabel and too weak to let Becky go. Isabel, watching from the sidelines, refused to intervene. She saw Becky for who she was from the beginning, and now the truth unfolded like a bitter play. When gossip reached her ears of Becky's extravagance, Isabel smiled and said calmly, "Let him feed her until he starves. He chose this bed, and he will lie in it." Her stubborn refusal to rescue him only deepened his torment, for he knew she could save him, yet she chose to let him drown slowly. There is no punishment greater than indifference. When love dies, hatred may still wound, but when a woman chooses coldness, she becomes untouchable. Isabel did not rage, nor weep, she simply refused. One desperate evening, Raymond returned home, pride swallowed, mask shattered. His company was not collapsing, but contracts were thinning, debts were rising, and rivals were circling. He sat before Isabel like a shadow of himself, no longer the arrogant husband, but a broken man seeking rescue. "Isabel," he said, voice low, "I need your help. The business is struggling. If you could invest, if you could lend me some of your inheritance, I could stabilize everything." It was the first time he acknowledged her power, and it burned his pride to ask. Isabel looked at him with cold eyes, her stubborn fire unshaken. She rose slowly, walked across the room, and stood tall before him. "Raymond," she said, her voice cutting like glass, "you mocked me, humiliated me, paraded girls like trophies while I bore your name. And now you come begging? No. My money will never touch your hands. You chose your path, walk it until your feet bleed." Her refusal was not shouted, but spoken with calm finality, and it crushed him more than any insult. He had expected resistance, but not this immovable wall. Isabel's stubbornness was now an empire of its own. He left that night, more broken than ever. Isabel, however, felt no pity. To her, this was not cruelty, it was justice. She would not allow herself to become his crutch, not after all she endured. She had warned him, and he had ignored her. Now her cold refusal was her revenge, and Raymond, for the first time, realized that he could lose everything, not because of bankruptcy, but because Isabel had hardened her heart against him. Reputation is currency in high places, and when it falters, even the wealthiest men become beggars at the table of influence. Raymond had money still, but Isabel had something greater: respect, presence, and the stubborn fire that made men bow. Society's shift was gradual, yet undeniable. Where once Raymond's name was spoken with admiration, it was now whispered with pity or ridicule. His wife, once mocked as too stubborn, too proud, was now celebrated as a force of nature. Isabel was invited to banquets, luncheons, and private meetings that shaped the city's future. Politicians courted her friendship, investors sought her counsel, and women admired her defiance. She had transformed from a scorned wife into a symbol of power. Her stubbornness was no longer seen as arrogance, but as a strength others envied. Raymond, meanwhile, noticed the doors closing. Invitations to exclusive events dwindled, investors second-guessed deals, and business associates distanced themselves. The shadow of Isabel's success loomed over him, and though his company still stood, it no longer commanded the reverence it once had. His pride suffered most at gatherings where Isabel appeared radiant while he struggled to mask his insecurity. Men who once bowed to him now turned their eyes toward her, and women who once envied Isabel now sought to be like her. The final humiliation came at a gala, where Isabel was seated at the governor's table while Raymond sat in the corner among forgotten faces. He tried to approach her, but she met him with a glare that silenced his steps. In that moment, he understood that power was no longer his to claim. Isabel had risen, stubborn and fierce, while he had shrunk into the very shadow he once forced her to live under. There are battles fought in silence, and those fought in public. The fiercest ones are when pride collides with stubborn fire before the eyes of the world. Isabel and Raymond's war reached its boiling point in a hall filled with laughter, wine, and cameras. At a charity banquet, Raymond, desperate to reclaim dignity, approached Isabel boldly in front of guests. Cameras clicked, reporters whispered, and the crowd leaned in to watch. He tried to speak softly, to portray reconciliation. "Isabel, we belong together. Let's end this foolishness. I still love you." But Isabel, ever fierce, was not moved. She rose from her seat, turned to face him before the entire hall, and declared, "You love me? No, Raymond, you loved your pride, your mistresses, and your image. You wanted me gone. Now watch me reign without you." The room erupted in gasps and applause. Raymond froze, humiliated. His attempt at reconciliation turned into public shame. Selene, watching from across the room, smirked knowingly, while Becky stormed out in anger, embarrassed to see her sponsor crushed so easily. Isabel sat back down, unbothered, sipping her wine as though nothing had happened. The event continued, but the moment lingered in every mind. Isabel had publicly broken Raymond's pride. For the rest of the night, Raymond wandered the hall like a ghost, whispers following him with every step. Isabel did not look at him again. She had won the battle not by shouting, but by standing firm, stubborn, and unyielding. That confrontation cemented her place as a queen in the eyes of society, while Raymond's pride lay in tatters at her feet. The flames of youthful passion burn quickly, but greed burns longer, devouring until there is nothing left. Becky, once Raymond's thrilling escape, soon revealed herself to be nothing but hunger wrapped in a smile. Becky had tolerated Raymond's slipping influence for as long as his wallet could sustain her desires. She enjoyed the trips, the jewelry, the fine dining, but as his company began to struggle, his gifts grew smaller and his patience shorter. The man who once made her feel like a princess was now snapping under financial strain, and Becky, too young and too reckless to endure hardship, began to grow restless. She started seeking attention elsewhere, flirting with wealthy politicians, entertaining advances from other businessmen who promised her more. Raymond noticed, and each time he exploded in rage, but Becky only laughed in his face. "If you can't keep up, let someone else do it," she snapped one night, shattering the illusion of love he once believed in. Her betrayal reached its peak when she openly attended an event on the arm of a rising politician, mocking Raymond without fear. The humiliation was unbearable. His friends whispered, society mocked, and Isabel's allies laughed quietly, knowing her stubborn prophecies were coming true. Becky no longer cared about discretion. She flaunted her new connections and discarded Raymond like an old suit. Pride wounded, Raymond tried to win her back with promises, but she dismissed him coldly. "You're not the man I thought you were. You're weak now." Her words cut deeper than any knife, for they echoed Isabel's taunts in another voice. When news of Becky's betrayal reached Isabel, she did not laugh, nor did she gloat. Instead, she simply nodded and said, "I told him, he traded gold for dust." Her calmness enraged Raymond more than Becky's desertion, because he knew that Isabel's stubborn refusal to fight for him had left him exposed to this humiliation. Now Becky was gone, and Selene had withdrawn, leaving him broken, abandoned, and mocked by the very women he thought would complete him. Pride often clings to symbols of power long after the power itself has faded. Raymond's company did not fall, but it no longer soared. It became a battlefield where his ego fought against reality, and reality was winning slowly. The company Raymond had once built with ferocity was beginning to show cracks. Contracts slipped away, investors grew hesitant, and rivals encroached. Though he still owned the business, its once commanding dominance in the market had shrunk. Every day he walked into the office, his staff greeted him with forced respect, but behind his back, they whispered about Isabel's growing influence, and whether Raymond could survive without her wealth. Pride kept him from admitting weakness, but each board meeting felt heavier, each financial report more bitter. He fought to keep appearances, smiling in public, while his nights were spent pacing in anxiety. Raymond's refusal to accept help only worsened matters. Isabel could have easily rescued him with her vast fortune, but her stubborn coldness made her unwilling to extend a hand. He went to her once more, begging softly, "Isabel, think of all we built. Help me keep it alive." But she stared at him, eyes blazing. "I told you, Raymond. My empire is mine. Yours is yours. Let's see who survives without the other." Her words stung because they forced him to confront his reality. He had destroyed the one bridge that could have saved him. Despite the struggles, the company did not collapse. Raymond clung fiercely to it, fighting to maintain its dignity, and though it staggered, it survived. But the cost was his pride. He knew society no longer saw him as a man of untouchable power. He was merely a husband overshadowed by his wife's stubborn throne, and that realization gnawed at him more than debt or betrayal ever could. Sometimes desperation drives a man back to the very door he once scorned. Not because love calls, but because regret claws at the soul, reminding him of what he lost and what he cannot reclaim. One night, broken and weary, Raymond returned to the old family house where Isabel still lived. He entered quietly, as though sneaking into the life he had abandoned. Isabel was in the living room, reading documents, her posture regal, her presence commanding. She did not rise when he entered. She only looked up, her eyes sharp and mocking. "Raymond," she said, her voice calm yet fierce, "have Selene and Becky gone out of stock? Or is it that I'm the only market you can't afford to lose?" Her taunt sliced him open. He tried to explain, to say he missed her, but Isabel's stubbornness was unshaken. "You wanted me gone. You wanted peace without my fire. Why crawl back now?" Raymond, defeated, dropped into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "I made a mistake," he whispered. But Isabel was unmoved. "A mistake is spilling water on the floor," she replied coldly. "You drowned me and called it freedom. Live with the flood you created." Her refusal to soften broke him further. For the first time, he realized that Isabel's stubbornness was not an act of pride alone. It was her shield, her weapon, her crown. He could not bend her, not anymore. That night he left the house in silence, his footsteps heavy with despair. Isabel, however, remained unshaken. She had waited too long to see this moment, when the man who mocked her now begged at her feet. And though her heart still carried scars, her mind was set. She would never let him back, for she had built herself into something greater than his love could ever hold. When private battles spill into family halls, truths are laid bare. Regret is never heavier than when spoken before those who raised us, for family sees through pride and pierces the heart. Raymond, desperate to reclaim even a fragment of Isabel's affection, reached out to her family. He begged them to intervene, to speak to her, to remind her of the vows they once took. Isabel's brothers, uncles, and even her mother arranged a meeting, hoping to reconcile what had become the city's most scandalous marriage. The gathering was tense, with Raymond seated humbly before them, stripped of arrogance. He pleaded, "I wronged Isabel. I let pride blind me, but I still love her. Please, help me win her back." His words dripped with regret, and for a moment the room softened. But Isabel entered like a storm. She listened quietly as Raymond begged, her family urging her to forgive. Then she rose, her voice sharp and stubborn. "Do not mistake my silence for weakness. Do not mistake my patience for love. This man paraded women in my face, mocked me before the world. And now that I have risen, he wants to crawl back? No, I am not the woman who bends for betrayal. I am Isabel, the wife he underestimated, the queen he abandoned." Her words silenced the hall, leaving even her family stunned. Raymond broke down, tears staining his face, but Isabel refused to yield. Her family tried to persuade her, but her stubbornness was iron. "Stay out of it," she warned. "This is my war, my decision. I will not let anyone turn me into a victim who forgives too easily. He wanted me gone. Now let him live with his choice." And with that, she walked out, leaving Raymond shattered in front of those who once believed he commanded his marriage. There are victories that roar and victories that whisper, but the greatest are those that burn silently, leaving the defeated haunted forever. Isabel did not need to shout her triumph. Her very existence became Raymond's eternal wound. The final scene of their story was not in a boardroom or a gala, but in the quiet of Isabel's new mansion, a palace she had purchased with her inheritance. She stood on the balcony, overlooking the city lights, her crimson gown billowing like fire in the night breeze. Raymond stood at a distance, outside the gates, watching with hollow eyes. He had not lost his company, not entirely, but he had lost something greater, the woman who once bore his name, who now bore her own empire. He wanted to call out, but his pride and her stubbornness created a gulf wider than the sea. Isabel, sensing his presence, did not flinch. She did not wave, nor did she smile. Instead, she raised her glass of wine to the sky as though toasting her own survival. In her heart, she whispered, "You tried to end me, Raymond, but I became my own beginning. You wanted me gone, but I have arrived." Her stubbornness had become her crown, and her fire her throne. She was no longer a wife scorned. She was a queen untouchable. Raymond turned away, his body heavy with regret. He knew he would live the rest of his life haunted by her refusal, taunted by her strength, and wounded by the knowledge that he had thrown away the greatest treasure he ever had. Isabel, fierce and stubborn, remained unyielding to the end. Her story a testament that sometimes the greatest revenge is not destruction, but survival, and the stubborn refusal to bow. Please like, share, and subscribe. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching to the end. Don't forget to come back for the next amazing tale yet.